Hi, this is the Magnificent Midlife Podcast, and I'm Rachel Lancaster. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now is our time. My guest today is Laura Davis. Laura is the author of 6 non-fiction books, which have sold more than 1.8 million copies. She's here today to talk mainly about her latest book, her first memoir, The Burning Light of Two Stars, a Mother-Daughter Story. I finished the book yesterday and was profoundly moved by it. I was also very tearful. So first, I'd like to thank you, Laura, for sharing your story and giving me the opportunity to read it. Welcome. It's lovely to have you here.
Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you. It's always wonderful when a host actually reads the book. So thank you for reading it. And we could have a much deeper conversation because of that.
Well, I don't like to interview somebody who's written a book that I haven't read. I haven't read your other books, although I'm probably going to go and read them now. But I didn't want to be talking specifically about your book if I hadn't read it. So I'm going to start by asking why you wrote this particular book.
You know, I think, Rachel, that we all have certain like core stories that live inside us. And this is definitely one of mine, this kind of the mother-daughter knot. I've been trying to untie it my whole life. My mother was a really dramatic, larger-than-life character. She was the sun in my world, and when I was little, I was orbiting around her. As I got older, she gave birth to another son, and so the two of us were at conflict about who was going to have control, basically, over my life. And, you know, she just had such a dramatic influence on me, and we had every reason to never speak to each other again. And yet we both struggled to reconcile with each other, you know, and then I ended up taking care of her at the end of her life. And so for me, that question of like, can you take care of someone who betrayed you in the past? I think is such a core question. It certainly was for me, and I think it is for millions of other people. Who are facing the care of an older relative, a parent, a mother, a father. And for me, the story just was like burning to come out. And I tried to walk away from it multiple times and would set it down and just think, I can't do this. I don't have the writing chops. I can't figure out the structure. My relatives are not going to like it. I had all these reasons, but I just had to keep coming back and wrestling with it. And it took me 10 years to finally complete it.
And you'd already managed to annoy a lot of your relatives already, hadn't you? So do you want to tell us a little bit about how that had happened?
Yeah, that's kind of an understatement. When I was in my 20s, late 20s, I remembered having been sexually abused by my grandfather, my mother's father. And I had blocked it out, I think like many children do, as a way to cope with trauma. And it began coming back in flashbacks, and it was completely devastating. It turned my entire life upside down. And I wanted my mother's support. You know, I was going through the worst thing I'd ever gone through. And when I went to her, you know, basically she chose her dead father over her living daughter, and she was hostile. She insisted I was making it up to destroy her. And we had already had many challenges in our relationship. It was already a volatile relationship, and that was the last straw. And soon after that, I ended up teaming up with a writer named Ellen Bass, and the two of us wrote a book called The Courage to Heal. This was 33 years ago, so a long time ago. And that book was the first book that helped women understand the process of how to actually heal from sexual abuse. Not just that it happened, but here's the pathway out. And it became this underground bestseller, you know, all over the world. And that really was like the final straw, because from my mother's point of view and her side of the family, not only was I making up lies about my grandfather, now I was doing it on national TV. And so that led to a very deep rift and an estrangement.
So you had to dig very deep to write this book, as you have done with all the other books. So how did you do that?
How did I do it? I think about things in a really deep way, and as I said, I've been wrestling with this relationship with my mother. Trying and for this one, I really had to figure out when I first started, she was the villain and I was the hero, or the victim, depending on the point of view. And I knew that I didn't want a story like that. And so, in order to create two fully fleshed out human characters on the page, I had to really do a lot of deep thinking, meditating. I went to back to therapy while I was writing this book, and some of this is just maturity because I'm much older than I was when I wrote that first book. But I had to begin to see my mother from a much bigger vantage point, not just as my nemesis or my antagonist, but as a very complex woman of her era, of her generation. I looked at the trauma that had been passed down through the generations in my family, and I started looking at the fact that this perpetrator of mine was her father. There were just a lot of factors that made me start to think of her with a great deal more compassion and ultimately admiration. She was really a remarkable woman of her generation. Even though she was incredibly challenging to me as a mother, there was so much more to her than that. And in terms of myself, I also had to do a lot of digging because I had to look at why had I always accentuated her worst qualities and really set those in stone. And some of her good qualities I had just, dismissed. And so I had to look at my habitual story about this relationship and how was that benefiting me? And I needed to let go of it. And I needed to begin to look at my own flaws, my own humanity. It took me a long time to get to the point of really seeing the two of us as it's kind of like an epic struggle between these
Mm.
two very powerful women who had every reason to never speak again, and yet both were incredibly compelled to try to find a way back to each other. So I wanted to understand why. Why was that, and how did we do it? How did we surmount that huge mountain that was keeping us apart to reconnect and find a way to basically agree to disagree and build a relationship around the edges of this huge dispute that had torn us apart?
But it's hard for somebody like me to understand the sheer size of that mountain that you had to traverse because, one, the awfulness of what happened to you as a child, then two, the utter betrayal that you then felt from your mother, that she didn't acknowledge your truth.
I worked with a writing coach. Actually, this man, he wasn't an editor. It was very interesting for me. I'd always only worked with editors for the first 6 books I wrote, and this time I chose a man who was an actor and a theater director because he really understood storytelling and he taught me so much about how to create a page turner, how to create a book that someone couldn't put down,
Yeah.
which I didn't understand. That was something a skill I had to learn. And one time in the beginning when we were working together, he had me make a list of, well, he called it the secret bonds between me and my mother. And it was the things that the two of us, that connected the two of us, that maybe nobody else knew about or nobody else shared. And I didn't think there'd be anything on this list, and it ended up being this huge list. And it was things as simple as that we love to play cards together. Like for both of us, bring out a deck of cards and my whole nervous system relaxes.
500 rummy, yes.
Yeah, 500 rummy, right. So I made that a thread. And then we both really love the movies, so we would go to the movies together. My mother was an actor, so we would go to the theater together. We liked to cook together. And then there were things I knew, like I knew that she was a closet smoker, even though she told everyone she had quit, and We both loved, the movie A Streetcar Named Desire. We could recite that movie by heart. So as I started to look at those things, I realized that there actually was a lot of connectivity, even though there was all this volatility too. Um, I sometimes I say we were two souls who couldn't quit each other, and I don't usually talk that way, but there was just something quite powerful in that mother-daughter bond that I couldn't just throw away as much as I wanted to. And maybe she probably wanted to at times too, because, when I look back now, I was a very challenging daughter, especially as a young woman.
It's hardly surprising, though, was it really? I mean, come on, give yourself a break.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, I was just being myself, but I mean, but she took everything I did as a personal assault. Every
Mm.
choice I made was to spite her or to hurt her instead of just that I was trying to figure out who I was.
I remember the bit when you came out to her, and that she made that all about her as well, didn't she? It
Now
was,
I'll never have grandchildren, and
yes.
you've confirmed my worst fear about you. Um, I have to admit though, that was terrible how she responded, but within, I'd say 3 or 4 years, which at the time felt like forever, but when I look back now, after a few years, she became my advocate, and
Mm.
at the end of her life, when she moved to California, she would talk about Karen, who's been my spouse for over 30 years, and
Mm.
she'd just introduce her to everybody. This is my daughter-in-law, Karen. And then she'd say, "You two have done such a good job with those kids. Who says lesbians shouldn't have children?" So, she changed. She was willing to evolve as a human being, and I give her a lot of
Yeah,
credit for that.
yeah, yeah. She didn't make it easy for you, though, did she? Why don't you read that little section when she tells you that she wants to move to California? Would you like to read that for
Sure,
us?
sure. This is right from the beginning of the book. And, each story, every story has what's called an inciting incident. And it's the thing that kicks the whole story into motion. So this is that scene. And the only thing you need to know is what happens immediately before this is I've just completed a year of treatment, intense treatment for breast cancer. And I've been given a really good prognosis. They got everything. I went through chemo and everything. And I go out to my backyard, and in our backyard, we have a fire pit. And I build a fire, and I have this little private ritual where I take the notebook I got from the Stanford Cancer Center and I burn it. And the idea for me was like letting go of the trauma of this year of illness and giving myself permission to now finally have this quiet, non-stressful time to digest what I have just been through in terms of facing my mortality, and I'm finally not going to have any more toxic surprises. So that happens immediately before this. 2 hours after my ceremony, I tasted my homemade tomato sauce simmering on the stove, added basil and oregano, a generous pinch of salt, a splash of red wine. Karen was picking up the kids on her way home from teaching reading at Watsonville High. They'd be home in half an hour. I was about to drop a handful of spaghetti into a pot of boiling water when the phone rang. It was my mother in New Jersey. We were due for a call. We hadn't spoken in several weeks. Cradling the phone between my neck and shoulder, I dropped the pasta into the pot, stirred to separate the strands, my glasses fogged with steam. I imagined her, smoking parliaments, curled up with an Afghan on the couch in the den. She'd probably just gotten home from her poetry class, or her Shakespeare class, or her Course in Miracles study group. I could never track her schedule. I set the timer for 13 minutes. "Lori, I've got a surprise for you." "Oh, yeah?" I was only half listening, maybe a quarter. I opened the fridge, rooted around for salad fixings. "Why don't you guess?" "I don't know, Mom. What's the surprise?" "Don't you want to guess?" I pictured her lighting another cigarette, residue of the day's lipstick reddening the tip. Ah, you went to an audition and got a part in a play? No, I'm afraid my acting days are over. Guess again. Just tell me, Mom. Are you sure you want to know? Of course, I want to know. Darling, I've made up my mind. She paused for effect. I'm moving to Santa Cruz. I wanted you to be the first to know. Blood rushed from my head. I closed the refrigerator, leaned back against the door. Pictures of the kids and little square art magnets clattered to the floor. It's true, in a moment of generosity years earlier, I had invited Mom to move out to California when she got old. We talked about it once or twice, but I never thought she'd actually take me up on it. It had been 10 years. It finally feels like the right time, Lori. New Jersey just isn't the same anymore. That's right. Your friends are dying off, going into assisted living, or moving to be close to their children. Oh my God, that's me! My hand tightened on the phone. My mother and I had been estranged for years. Yes, we'd forged a shaky peace, but 3,000 miles still separated us for a reason. Our reconciliation only went so far. I just love Santa Cruz, and I love your family. Wow, Mom, that's amazing. I mean, great. I'm so happy. Well, that's good, darling, because I met with a real estate agent today. I've put my condo on the market. She says it's the perfect time to sell a place at the shore. I collapsed into one of the red, cushy chairs at our yellow Formica kitchen table and stared at the black and white checkered linoleum. The floor needed a washing. Lori, are you there? Yeah, Mom, I'm here. You still want me, don't you? Of course, I want you. We all want you. It's just that I never thought you'd actually do it. Well, I'm not getting any younger. No, she wasn't. Mom was 80 years old, and her memory was failing. You don't sound very excited. I am excited. I'm just surprised, that's all. How could I possibly be excited? The woman who'd betrayed me at the worst moment of my life was moving to my town, and I was the one who'd invited her. A beep reverberated in my head and wouldn't stop. Mom was talking about escrow and how hard it was going to be to pack, but I barely heard her. She was the white noise in the background. I was hovering outside my body, listening to just one voice, the one screaming in my head, taking up every inch of bandwidth. I finally gotten through cancer, and now this? Why the hell didn't you ask me? How about, Lori, do you remember that conversation we had 10 years ago? I've been thinking about it more seriously and wonder if you still think it would be a good idea. For you, for me, for Karen and the kids. Or how about, Lori, I know you're just getting over cancer. Is this a good time for me to move across the country to live in your town? My friends told me about this gorgeous mobile home park right at the beach in Santa Cruz. De Anza. Have you heard of it? Yes, Mom. I'll go right from one ocean to the other. So you'll stop by and talk to the manager? Sure. Happy to do that for you. I grabbed a brand new yellow legal pad. It had been months since I'd made a list. What would I have put on it? Take toxic drugs? Throw up? Smoke pot so you could eat? Grow white blood cells? Watch West Wing reruns? Survive? As I wrote, "Find Mom a place to live, Deanza," on the pristine yellow page, Mom said, "Gotta run, darling. I promised your Aunt Ruth a call tonight." Click. She hung up on me. So I'll stop there.
Wow, thank you. I haven't heard the audiobook. I've read it, so it's lovely to hear you put a voice to your mum.
Mhm.
It's really special. What I love was the way that you weave the details of life in amongst the bigger story, and you are telling a story. It reads like a story, and that's what I love about it. And as you say, it really is a page turn. You just want to keep going and find out what's going to happen, and what's, even though we kind of know what's going to happen because we know what the story overall is about, the elements of it are all there and all very interesting and exciting to find out about, and you peel back all the layers, and it's beautiful. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. Also, everybody go buy this book. It's wonderful.
I think right now, so many of us have someone in our life or more than one person who we are distant from, and it doesn't have to be a huge thing like what happened with me and my mother. It could be something much smaller, a disagreement that just gets papered over. And these things can really fester and lead to a lot of broken relationships, distant relationships. And I think all of us probably have someone in our life that we would love to be able to resolve things with. And even if we can't do it directly with them, because I think there are some circumstances in which if someone is too toxic or abusive or they're mentally ill or they've shut the door on you and a direct relationship is inadvisable or unwise, I think we still can come to a place of resolution inside ourselves. And I think I used to think that the opposite of estrangement was reconciliation, and now I think it's peace. How do we
Mm,
get to that place of not feeling completely churned up and distraught when we think of that person? How do we get away from having their absence be such a presence in our lives? And that's what I had to do with my mother, and I hope that our story is inspires people, and I think it has. I'm already hearing from people who are saying, I read your book and I called my mother for the first time in 18 years, or
oh my
I just reached
goodness,
out to my brother, or that feels great as an author to feel like that
I
your
bet.
story is kind of cracking people's hearts open because I think they think, if Laura and her mother could do what they did, and if she could end up at her mother's deathbed after everything they went through, maybe I should take another look at this wall that I've been holding for so many
Mm,
years.
mm. Yes, because you were able to pull the wall down. It took you a while to do it, but you were able to pull that wall down. And therefore, yes, it is an inspiration for other people to be able to do the same.
I would say yes, we pulled the wall down, but not completely. I mean, I this is not a fairy tale, and I really want to
Mm,
make that clear that there was ways I felt like I never felt I could be intimate with my mother. I never felt like I could really be vulnerable with her. I think even all the way until she was very old and had dementia and was basically a different mother than the one I had known before. I still, even though I went through the motions of caring for her and was like the good daughter, there still was a wall that I kept up. It just was subtler. So, things were not completely resolved, but they were resolved enough to, I would say, be a miracle considering where we started.
mm. It's interesting, that idea of the good daughter, which comes through. It's a theme throughout the book, isn't it? That you switch into good daughter mode, and I
Yeah.
think so many of us are the good daughter, and so many women take on, as you did, more of the parental care burden than the men, our male siblings, for
Yes.
example. And we're expected to, as well as you were. It was what was expected of you was rather different to what was expected of your brother, and I have encountered that in a similar
Yeah.
way. I don't know whether it's our mother's generation or what, but well, my house growing up was highly gendered. It was very much, the
Mhm.
girls did this and the boys did that, and there wasn't a lot of crossover, to be honest. But I think, what daughter doesn't have tension in the relationship with her mother? I just think it is such an intense relationship, isn't it? I don't know of anybody that doesn't have a completely
Mhm.
tension-free relationship with their mother.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a generation gap. I mean, I'm a daughter, I'm a mother, and I'm a grandmother. So, watching all these generations, and I look at my relationship with my daughter, she's in her mid 20s, so she's still kind of in the stage of separating from the family and figuring out who she is. And I would say we have a very good relationship, but she definitely doesn't. I don't know the inside of her life at all. I don't have rummage rights to her inner thoughts or her
Rummage rights.
emotions, or
I like that.
I get a press release about her life, and um, I accept that. It's like I'm really working not to do what my mother did, which is to feel like somehow she owned me, and that I felt she was always so invasive and intrusive. And so I've really worked not to do that with my own children. And I think, pretty much I've succeeded at that. And I think one of the things I faced, which a lot of women do, caregivers, is that my kids were teenagers during the years I was caring for my mother. So I was in that sandwich generation. I was in midlife. I felt like I was in a vice, and I felt like I was failing as a parent. I was failing as a daughter. Plus, I had this huge unresolved thing with my mother that was triggered all the time by caregiving her. I was running a business. I mean, it was a very challenging time, and I think it's a really hard time for many, many women when you are being pulled in so many different directions.
And what have you learnt, sort of big picture, about mother-daughter relationships?
That there's always going to be a generation gap. I think, that there are things about my daughter's life that I will never understand. And there are
Mm.
probably things about my life that she will never understand. And that's just the way it is. And that what I'm looking for is like, where do we intersect? Where's the bridge between us? And to be grateful for that. But I feel like there's a way we're always missing each other because, when she's at the stage of life where she really is curious about me, I'll probably be dead. It's probably not going to happen while I'm still here. Um, and after my mother died, one of the interesting things I tracked in the memoir is that after she died, I I was cleaning out her things. Actually, my brother did help with that task. That was one thing he did help with. And I came across this cache of letters. And the letters were all the letters that I had ever sent to her, all the letters she had ever sent to me, which she had hand copied. This was way before the internet or email or anything like that. And also first drafts of letters she had written and then censored and not sent. So I had all this stuff. And then
Wow.
in my like hidden in the eaves in my under my office stairs were these boxes that were in plastic called Laura's Archives. I'd like shoved stuff in there decades earlier. I had no idea what was in there. And I had saved all of her letters and all the letters I'd written to her. And in these old, musty journals were drafts of all the letters I didn't send to her. So when I put all this together after her death, there was like this huge, like two big file folders of letters. I put them in chronological order. And um, this was, this showed me something about mothers and daughters because the written record contradicted the stories I had been telling for decades. Like I had said, my mother and I didn't speak for 7 years. And I just proclaimed it. I'm an author. I wrote it. I told everyone about it. And it was like a big deal. And then I saw that we had corresponded throughout that whole time. So we had a connection in words. Um, and I also had to see that I had remembered these really nasty letters and communications from her, and they were there, but there were also these sweet, loving letters that were kind, that were generous, and I had completely forgotten that. It's like I had a very selective memory about our relationship and about who she was, and I really was stockpiling evidence to prove my version of our story, which was that she was awful and, I was the hero. And so I had to unpack all of that. And it was quite painful, you know. But I just saw that, where our stories about each other it was everything I said was true, but only part of the truth. And it took a lot
It's
of
your
courage.
version.
It was my version, yeah, my version that somehow I had benefited from. So that became part of my story as well.
But I mean, I have letters from my mother
Mm.
from when I was away at college and living abroad, and then nothing after that. I'm wondering, do you write letters to your daughter?
No,
So we'll have lost that, won't we? That record, that
right,
ability to go back and fact check our own thoughts,
right.
because we won't have that evidence now, will we? Because we don't write letters anymore.
Yeah, I think it's a loss. I think
Yeah.
it's definitely there's gains and losses of living in a digital world, and I think that's one of the things we've lost is the art of correspondence.
Mm. I think it's so interesting that both of you were drafting. I can imagine both of you drafting and revising, and then, oh no, I'm not going to send that. Interesting.
One thing I've thought about that though is that for a while I was really beating myself up over it, but ultimately what I came to understand is that for that period of time, like the letters went on, I don't know, for maybe 15 years or something. I mean, once we started reconciling and having more communication in other ways, we stopped writing letters. But during that time, like a letter allows you to pause. You could read it, you could digest it, you could share it with other people. You can take a week to respond or months to respond. You can rewrite your response over and over again. You don't have to deal with the heat. In my case, the heat of my mother's rage, and she was explosive emotionally, and I always shut down around her. I didn't have to deal with that in a letter. I mean, she could be really angry in a letter, but it was very different than being in a room with her or being on the phone with her. And so, in a way, letters were not. They were not really a real relationship. I mean, they were a filtered relationship. I'm really glad we kept that thread going, but I ended up really forgiving myself much more for my the way I had categorized her, because I saw that the letters did show kindness and generosity, but only at a distance. And then even after we reconciled, we still lived 3,000 miles apart from each other. And I think that that cushion of distance enabled us to reconcile. And then at the end of her life, when she moved across the country, after that phone call, it made things much more challenging for me because I couldn't get away. And then her decline, her dementia. In the early stages of dementia, people are often really argumentative. They can get into rages. They are often have a lot of anxiety, confusion, and it was all the qualities that had been so challenging for me about her in the past. And there they were in my face again. And yet was it because of the dementia, or was it just who she was? And so it was triggering, I guess. It just brought up a lot of things that I thought were resolved started coming back up. And so it made the caregiving of her far more challenging for me than it might be for someone else.
But I did find your caregiving journey just really, what's the word? It was beautiful in a way, because you went from what you've just described to, feeling much more able to actually physically care for her, to do the physical caring. And I think, that that for me, I mean, my mum's still alive, but I'm always scared, and I think every woman
Yeah,
whose mother is older, but, we know they're not going to live forever. And we know that they're probably going to need more care the older they get. And it was very touching for me to read how that relationship evolved for you, and how you were able to do things that you never would have
right.
imagined that you could ever have done. And that actually gave me hope because I'm in the
Hmm.
same position. I'm thinking, I don't well, I can't do that. I won't
Right.
be able to,
Right.
how will I cope? And then it's like, okay, well, Laura coped. She's managed to do it. It's like that wall again. She's managed to get through it. So I think in that respect, there is huge inspiration within the book for older daughters who are, either grappling with this now or the grappling with the potential of
Right.
it, before too long. So thank you for that because it was really beautiful to see that evolution.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, just yesterday I got an email from a woman, and she said, "I know I'm going to have to take care of my mother, and I've always been dreading it, and now I realized it actually might be an opportunity." So that's
Mhm.
just what you're saying. It was touching. You know,
Yeah.
one thing about storytelling is that you have to show the growth of your character from the beginning of the story to the end. And for me, that the trajectory, it's a memoir, I'm the main character, is really from being closed hearted for good reason to gradually opening my heart, particularly to my mother. Um, and one of the ways I demonstrated that, because you have to weave this in consciously as a writer, is how much I was repelled by her physically in the beginning. Like I didn't want her near me. I didn't want her to touch me. If she hugged me, I would cringe, and I just felt creepy physically. And then at the end of her life, at the end, I'm washing her body, and I'm very intimately caring for her with a lot of tenderness. So you get to see that transformation over the course of all those years. And yeah, I never thought I could do it either. I really never thought I when this is kind of interesting when I was at the height of my estrangement from her, my brother and I met in Colorado. We were on a giant hike, and I remember we stopped for lunch, and I said to him, I said, and our parents were divorced, and I said, when they get old, I said, I'll take dad, you take mom, because there's no way I could ever take care of her when she gets old. Like, I was like making sure I would never be in this position. And it's just, I think the thing that, certainly have become more open-hearted and more compassionate and also more comfortable with the end of life from having gone through this experience. But also, I've really learned that there are surprises in life that you just could never anticipate. I mean, when we were the most estranged, if you had said that I would be wanting to and caring for her at the end of her life, I just would have looked at you like you were so crazy. So for me, that I like that idea that life is going to bring us surprises and that we really don't know what's possible. And as I said before, not all relationships are going to be reconciled, and some should not be. But there was enough good between us and enough. Both of us wanted it. I think both of us really wanted to be in each other's lives, and we fought past tremendous obstacles to get there.
Yeah. Well, it is a very, very beautiful story. So, what advice do you have for women, especially, to help when they lose parents and particularly their mother?
I remember when my mother died. The way I thought about it was that I mentioned before that she was always like the sun, and she needed to be. She needed to be the center of everything. Um, and I realized that my whole life had been in reaction to her. So either I was repelled by her, I was pushing her away or shoving her away, I was pulling her to me, I was hating her, I was loving her, but that it was like so many things in my life were in reaction to her, and when she was gone, I felt untethered. I felt like the thing that had anchored me to the earth had let me go, and I was like this balloon just flying free without any anchoring. And it took me a long time to. It was like, it felt like when she died, it felt like all my internal furniture was completely rearranged, and I didn't recognize where I was. And that grief process, which in part, I used writing as a way to process that grief and to make sense of this like incredibly complex, huge relationship in my life, it helped me sort it out and to find that grounding again, and then to realize, that my father had died quite a bit before my mother, but that I was the next in line for death. I mean, I think that's the other thing happens when both your parents die. You're suddenly in the spot of the next logical death, and you kind of hope that's the case. You don't want people younger than you dying out of turn. Um, so I think what I would say to people is just give yourself the time and space to understand that your world has shifted irrevocably. Like it's one of the biggest changes that you'll ever experience in your life. And it doesn't matter what your relationship was with your mother. Even if you were, in some ways, I think if you're estranged or you never knew your mother or your mother abandoned you or something, it's even harder. When a relationship is ambivalent or unresolved, I think grief is really complicated. When my mother died, I felt like clean. I felt like we had, as much as was possible between us, things were resolved. I was resolved with her, even though not everything was sorted out. Um, but I think just to give yourself time and know that it's so much bigger than you could imagine. And, we don't get to practice for the death of our parents. And so like I kept thinking, I'm not doing this right. I'm doing it wrong. I'm not helping her the way I should when she was dying, and um, I think just to be present and to just show up and breathe, just be there. That's what I did, and I'm glad I did. I witnessed every piece of her death. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
that was important for me. It might not be for someone else, but for me, I really wanted that experience of, it reminded me of, birthing babies, people dying. To me, it's all the same circle, and the energy actually is quite similar.
Mm. No, it was very profound, and I think somebody told you, didn't they? Just to love her, just
Hmm.
that's enough.
Yeah, just love her. And at the end of her life, I finally was capable of that. After 57 years, I was 57 when she died, and finally, I was able to love her. It
Mm.
should be such a simple thing. It was never simple between us.
Mm. And I think what is so interesting to me is that I've interviewed a lot of women on this podcast whose journey in life, whose passion, whose mission has come out of trauma. And you're no different to them in that, you've had extreme trauma, I have to say. But you have then used that to heal others, haven't you? And that, so how, just can you tell us a little bit about how you help people to heal?
I've just been a word person my whole life. I've been in love with language. I've been in love with writing and reading, and I've been writing since I could probably hold a pencil. It's been a really big part of my life, both in terms of like my internal process, in terms of understanding what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, how to make decisions, tapping into memories and emotions. Writing has always been my go-to modality. And for the past, since the Courage to Heal, so I'd say over 30 years, I have been helping other people with their writing. So I teach writing as a tool for healing and transformation. So I teach a workshop on writing through grief. And I really believe that when we tell our stories and claim them and write them down and then read them to at least one trusted witness, that it's very transformative. It helps things move through us. And I think it's one of the most powerful ways of healing. So that's the work I've been doing for several decades, is mostly working with women, primarily women, some men, but almost 98% women, usually in groups. I don't really work one-on-one with people. I'm not so interested in being an editor, although I'm capable of that. I'm much more interested in the kind of transformation that happens when you get women together in a room and they start telling true stories, and one person's honesty kind of cracks the world open for the next person, and then that person's story cracks the world open for the next person, and suddenly a topic that was taboo is on the table and everyone's writing about it. I remember when I was teaching a retreat right before my mother died. In fact, I had to leave the retreat to be at her deathbed. And I was writing about the end of her life. I knew it was, I didn't know when, and suddenly everyone was writing about their aging parents, or the deaths they witnessed, or the healthcare system, or well, all the things I was talking about. Suddenly, that's what was happening at that retreat. So um, that's mostly what I've done, both in terms of the books I've read. On my website, there's a little logo. It says, Healing Words That Change Lives. And that's the role my books have played, and that's how I try to show up as a teacher and a facilitator. And I hope that this new book, I don't know if entertaining. I don't know that it's entertaining. I think it's a gripping book. And it has humor in it for sure. But a lot of people said they laughed and cried as they read it. And I hope it really touches people and motivates them to think more deeply about the relationships in their own life. And maybe it'll inspire some people to tell their own stories, which I think is such a wonderful thing for women to do. We need women to testify about their own lives, the truth of their lives, much more than we have so far.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, follow, and share it. Also, giving a 5-star review really helps get the word out. You'll find the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can get my book, Magnificent Midlife, Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause, and Beyond. Make the very best of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.